Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is politics reporter Sara Dorn. Sara, thanks for popping on.
Hi, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I do want to talk to you about the East Palestine train derailment and all of the chaos and the fallout surrounding that. First, can you give us a brief overview of what happened in the eastern Ohio town since the train derailed back on February 3rd?
So 38 train cars, these were Norfolk Southern train cars, derailed on February 3rd, as you said, and 11 of them were carrying hazardous materials. In the days that followed, the EPA, the National Transportation Safety Board, and the National Guard were all deployed to help with the cleanup, and Norfolk Southern, in conjunction with the EPA, began conducting what's known as a controlled burn of the remaining cars, several of which were carrying hazardous materials. The most notable one, I would say, is vinyl chloride, which is primarily used to produce PVC plastic and can be linked to liver cancer in people who are exposed long term. So the Department of Natural Resources has estimated that 43,000 aquatic animals were killed. Residents have reported nausea, some respiratory problems, rashes in the wake of this. Nonetheless, the EPA has said that the water and air in East Palestine are safe. And though the governor did issue an evacuation order when the controlled burn was going on, and this was due to a risk of explosion, they have urged all residents to return to their homes, but grave concerns persist nonetheless, especially because this is a community where a lot of residents, their businesses and livelihoods are heavily reliant on farming and the environment. And as I said, the Department of Natural Resources has said that the majority of the animals that they have recorded as dying in the wake of this crash have been aquatic animals. Residents have reported that their farm animals have died, and odd behaviors among those animals. So that's definitely a persistent concern for people there, given the heavy reliance on the environment.
Sara, as we sit here now, we're about a month out from the disaster. Can you give us an overview? What is life like current day in East Palestine? Is it back to normal? What does the cleanup look like? Things like that.
So as I said, the EPA has said that the air and water are safe, and they are conducting ongoing testing there. The CDC has set up health screening sites for residents who are reporting that they're having respiratory problems, nausea, rashes, and just who are generally concerned about their health in the wake of this disaster and the unknown chemicals that were in the air and the water and soil. Today, Norfolk Southern, which is responsible for the cleanup in conjunction with the EPA, is removing the tracks in East Palestine to excavate the soil below. And DeWine is visiting today, in light of that track removal. And Norfolk Southern initially said that it did not require, the cleanup did not require any track removal, but they sort of reversed course on that amid criticism from residents, who remain concerned about the environmental effects.
Sara, I do want to talk about the political backlash from this incident. Almost immediately, there was a partisan feud over this. Can you explain why?
So I would say that the political backlash really began when residents learned that the disaster did not qualify for financial relief from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And FEMA is largely set up to handle large-scale disasters like hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, and most of the financial aid that they provide is centered around property damage. FEMA did send a response team to the crash site about 2 weeks later, and DeWine, in conjunction with FEMA, came out and issued a statement explaining, the support that FEMA was providing to East Palestine. But I would say another layer of criticism really started to swell when President Joe Biden visited Ukraine last week ahead of the 1 year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Republicans really took this opportunity to criticize not only Biden, but Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg for not visiting the crash site sooner. Though I do want to say that, again, as I mentioned earlier, NTSB, the EPA was on the ground. EPA Administrator Michael Reagan has visited the site at least twice. But yes, I mean, this has really become a huge partisan feud and an example of, how all local politics can in many ways be nationalized. And of course, I can talk more about the dynamics there later in our conversation.
Let's talk about who has visited and the players that haven't visited yet. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg did visit, but the timing of his visit was really criticized, amongst other things. Why is he getting clobbered at his response over this?
So Pete Buttigieg is really a prominent figure in the Democratic Party. He's been floated as a possible presidential contender for 2024 and, more likely 2028, though he has announced no plans to run. He's long been a target for Republicans given his national prominence. And he has not really given, the clearest answer as to why he waited so long to visit. He has said that he wished he sent out a tweet, a few weeks after the derailment expressing his concern. And he has said that he wished he spoke out publicly sooner. But in terms of waiting to visit, he suggested when he did end up visiting last week that he was following normal protocol. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a number of other federal agencies have responded. The National Transportation Safety Board, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they were all, with the exception of FEMA, but the NTSB and the EPA were on the ground within days. And in defending their response, the White House has really highlighted those two agencies and how they have been actively involved in the cleanup and ensuring that the air, the water, the soil there are safe.
As you said, Buttigieg is a rising star in the Democratic Party. Point blank, how bad is this for him politically?
So if he were to run for higher office, I mean, this is certainly something that would be used in Republican attack ads against him. He's obviously a Democrat, and as I mentioned, his name has been floated as a potential presidential contender for 2024 or 2028. He will most likely face ongoing questions about his response and the federal government's response in general from the House Oversight Committee, which is led by Republicans and has announced a probe into the DOT's response. Some Republicans, including Senator Marco Rubio, have called for his resignation. And, impeachment prospects also have not been ruled out, but moving an impeachment trial through the Democrat-controlled Senate is highly unlikely. And I don't believe that any Republicans have gone as far to suggest that he definitively should be impeached over this. And I think it's also important to note that Republicans have called for the impeachment of many Biden administration officials, including Biden himself and, more recently, Department of Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas over his role in the border crisis. So this is definitely something that's not going away for him anytime soon. But whether it affects his political future, I think that there's a lot to play out there, including the long-term effects of this disaster in East Palestine and how it really affected the environment and whatever findings the Oversight Committee is able to unearth in terms of communications between federal officials about their response and just what they did and did not do in the wake of this derailment.
Let's talk about President Biden. As you and I are sitting here, he has not yet visited East Palestine. What has his response been?
He said as recently as last week that he has no plans to visit. And, I think the administration is just trying to reiterate the coordination between federal agencies that has already happened in defending itself against this criticism. When President Biden visited Ukraine last week, he made a point to make a call to Ohio Governor Mike DeWine from Ukraine and speak to him about the disaster. But yes, again, the president has not said that he has said that he does not have any plans to visit East Palestine.
And a big political figure who did visit recently is former President Donald Trump. Why did he visit, and what has the response to his visit been?
So Trump is very much at home in East Palestine. This is in a congressional district where 60% of voters cast their ballots for him during the previous two elections. And Republicans have sought to play up the narrative that this is an example of Democrats forgetting about and abandoning voters in rural areas. Trump, when he was there, he passed out water. He met with first responders. He was joined by Republican Senator J.D. Vance, who was endorsed by Trump. And of course, he also re-upped his criticism of Buttigieg and Biden, and speaking about what Republicans say is an abandonment of East Palestine and in general voters in rural areas. So this was definitely a move that was not surprising for Trump.
Sara, this is a problem that has been going on now for a month. It continues to unravel. So as there are updates, I hope you come back and join us. Sara Dorn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany.